So once again, good afternoon, everybody. I think we'll make a start now. We see that there are many participants in and still some joining as well. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Alan Oliver. I'm the Business Development Director with Ex Libris, and it's my pleasure to host you for the event this afternoon. First of all, I want to give my thanks to Daniela, my colleague from marketing, who's taken care of all of the hard work, the setup and the arrangements for this webinar. So Daniela, thank you very much for that. And I am also very pleased to introduce Jane Smith. So I hope that you see Jane sitting, unfortunately, behind a photograph of the Natural History Museum. It's truly a wonderful place to visit. I love to go there. But obviously we don't in these times. But Jane, it's really great to have you here. Jane is head of Department of Library and Archives at the Natural History Museum. And we've certainly known each other for quite some time. And I'm very happy to hand over to Jane, who's going to tell us about their experiences of Alma and Primo at the Natural History Museum. If you have any questions, then please use the chat or the Q&A, and I will try to watch those as we go along and relay them to Jane at the end. So Jane, it's my pleasure to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. And I'm going to leave my video on just for a short time, but if the connection gets a little bit flaky or you can't hear me properly, I hope Daniela or Alan will just prompt me and I'll turn off the video to help the connection. But just to say good afternoon or good morning or good evening, depending on where you're calling in from. And it's a real pleasure to join you all this afternoon. So, but before I actually start the talk properly, I would like to say thank you to Ex Libris, and obviously particularly Alan and Daniela, for inviting me to talk about the Natural History Museum Library and Archives and our experience of working with them and their systems, as well as with the Ex Libris user community. It's also an opportunity to return a favour. When we were exploring options for a new library management and discovery system way back in 2012-13 at the start, colleagues in other libraries were very generous with their time in sharing information and hosting site visits. Also, after we had decided on Alma and Primo, again, the sharing of experience and practice was incredibly helpful. And I'm very lucky. I work with an exceptional team. They're not all the same people who were with us throughout our project to select Alma and Primo and the implementation and afterwards. But I'm very, very fortunate to work with such a grand and innovative and creative team. So today, what I'd like to cover for maybe perhaps the next 25 minutes or so is to set the context, a brief overview of the Natural History Museum. And I'm virtually standing outside the museum at the moment on what looks to be a beautiful cloudy day, despite it being grey and miserable outside my own window at the moment. And also to give a little bit of background around the Natural History Museum Library and Archive, and to set the strategic context that was so important then, continues to be important now and as we look to the future. So, and that will help, I hope, understand what we were looking for from a library management system and discovery layer and why that was and is so important for us. So I'll run through the requirements building that we went through, the tender and selection process very briefly, and also the implementation to go live a long time ago now, it seems, in July 2014. And then what I'd like to lead on to is the success of working with Ex Libris and how we have realised the benefits, and using Alma and Primo has had a true impact on how we operate and our future. I'd like to touch on some of our recent experience as well during this COVID period, and again, how important Alma and Primo has been during this very, very challenging few months. But I'd like to end on the future. So I will keep around the chat if I can, but we'll probably handle questions right at the end. But if I do see something I can potentially touch on as we go on, I'll do that. I'm clicking the wrong thing. There we go. I'm trying to move on to the next. There we go. Apologies for being a little slow on the uptake with this, with the technology, even though we're talking about technology. So what I should have said at the beginning is that the implementation of Alma and Primo for us, it wasn't just about changing the technology. It was about a full change program and realising a new capability, a new capacity. It was about thinking about the long term so that we would still be a relevant library and archive, and our collections would still be relevant in the future. So a little bit of background about the Natural History Museum. It's an unusual organisation. It's a combination of different things. It's partly a scientific research institute with a collection that forms part of both the national and international infrastructure. But it's also a museum and a visitor attraction, and increasingly a virtual space. So originally the museum opened in 1881, and it only became an independent museum in the 1980s. Originally, even though it moved to South Kensington, it was still part of the British Museum. And it remains, in the current context, a non-departmental body, so it's part of UK government. It's funded by government through the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport within the UK. It's governed by a board of trustees who are appointed or approved by the Prime Minister's office and covered by the British Museums Act, and our museum records, which form part of the public record for the UK, is covered by the Public Records and Museums Act. But it is regarded as one of the world's great public-facing scientific institutions with a world-class engagement offer. And our total income, actually, is a mixed economy. We receive a significant proportion of our funding through grant and aid, but an equally significant proportion is through external funding through different sources, including scientific and other research, which essentially almost completely funds the research effort within the museum. If I click on the right arrow this time. So I just want to say a little bit about strategic content. The museum goes through various strategic phases. The phase we were in, 2013 to 2017, when we initially made the change to Alma and Primo, a particular science strategy was in place, and the library and archive formed part of the science group within the museum, although it has a cross-museum role. So the science strategy was divided into key focal areas around scientific discovery, scientific infrastructure, and scientific engagement with the public. But it also we set ourselves grand challenges as well to make headway, particularly with our digital offer, and essentially turning ourselves inside out as a museum and a collection and a science operation. And as we move now into a relatively new strategic phase that began at the end of last year with the current cross-museum strategy, which leads up to 2031. And the reason that date is so significant is it will be the 150th anniversary of the opening of the museum at South Kensington. and having a separate identity as a natural history museum. It's a fairly wide-ranging strategy, but the key goal is for us as a museum to play our part in supporting tackling or finding solutions to what is a planetary crisis. It's not just about climate change. The planet as a whole is potentially at a critical point, and it's important that our collections, which are perpetually relevant, and particularly the library and archive collections, which often act as a bridge between science and other forms of research, and is a way in for the public to deepen their understanding of the natural world and understand the challenges that we're facing. So moving on to library and archives in a little bit more detail, our collections are a combination of breadth and depth of coverage, international in scope. They model the development of natural history science over time to the present day. They're complementary to the specimen collections that are held by the museum and also collections held in other parts of the world. And they have developed side by side with those specimen collections and are used in an integrated way with those collections. Many items in our collections actually substitute for type specimens, so they're often potentially the only representation in an image or a description of a species that potentially doesn't exist anymore. But we're also a service. We provide a range of services to support both our internal science and engagement users, those they collaborate with, and the wider public and research communities. We're also a collaborator, a partner in initiatives that are digitising our collections and making them available for open science and open culture.
Jane, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the slide that we see is still the NHM science strategy. Is that the right one, or did it already move on?
No, it isn't. I've moved down 2 by now, so I'll try again. I don't know if somebody can see. You need to go down another 2. We should be on collections, service, and collaborators. So there should be an image of the globe.
Yes, that's the one that we've got now. Sorry to interrupt you, Jane.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's always a challenge, isn't it? There seems to be time lag or in a different time zones. So I am going to move on to the next.
Jane, I think you maybe you were muted, but I think everything's good now, and we still have the slide with the globe.
Okay, so if I move back, has that changed yet?
So now we see libraries and archives, collections, and usage.
Good. I wonder if there's just a little time lag. If that continues, then I can hand over to Daniela perhaps and just say when to change to the next slide.
Yeah, or I can just let you know if there's any delay, no problem.
Good. And everybody listening, thank you very much for your patience through this process. So this really is a very congested slide, but what I wanted to convey, and hopefully if you download the slides later, it'll just give you a flavour of the range of resources. I mentioned earlier that we're very similar to, in many ways, academic libraries, and we do mirror a lot of the activities that happen through an academic library, that we support the research cycle. But there are some differences. This is a national collection. It is the national collection for natural history science in the UK. Therefore, we retain our collections potentially longer than some other research institutes will do. The historical literature is perpetually relevant. It is still relevant to current science, but it is also relevant to new and evolving research areas, particularly in the arts and humanities, that often shed new light onto our scientific collections by bringing those different perspectives. But one of the challenges we faced way back in 2013 was that we had, using our current then library management system, it was quite difficult because of the practice we had in place to gather in very detailed information about the use and, if you like, exploitation of our collection. So that was a key element that we wanted to address by the change we made. I've just changed slides, and I hope you can see that.
Yes, we can, Jane. Yeah.
Good, thank you. So our core drivers, what we wanted to achieve in 2013 was to develop an environment where primarily our researchers and our primary group of users is science, but anybody who wanted to use our collections. We wanted to create a seamlessness between the physical and the digital environment, and to develop our collection more as not just as a resource for science, but to meet a growing demand from arts, humanities, and the public to make use of these very deep and rich collections. So we wanted a solution that was going to tap into new technology, the combination of the library and archive, and enable us to support open science outreach and engagement. And I'm going to move on to the next slide, which I hope you can see. So we wanted to be able to connect the physical collections we had with the digital versions we were creating through an extensive digitization program, using both boutique digitization methods and engaging in a mass digitization program with collaborators across the globe in a biodiversity digital library and what has grown into a data resource, which is the Biodiversity Heritage Library. And this slide shows that what we were trying to tap into was 250 years of systematic descriptions of life within biodiversity. And a later field of endeavour is geodiversity. So we've had over 5.4 million volumes dating back to the 15th century, including over 800 monographs and 40,000 journal titles, the majority of which were published pre-1923, a significant proportion out of copyright, but some still in copyright. So that was our ongoing challenge. We wanted to make that literature available. We wanted to create an open access environment. We wanted to do some data mining so that the data locked in those collections could be used and reused, and to link our collections in that digital environment with other collections and the specimen collections. But we needed a new system. The system we had, and I hope you can see this new slide, was over 15 years old. The way it had been configured matched a very old way of the museum being organised, and the library in particular being organised. Originally, the library was organised across 5 libraries. As a department, it was operated as a separate library and archive within the museum. But within that, there were 5 separate libraries operating across 3 separate locations in the UK. And the system we had just was not fit for purpose for what we were then going to want to achieve. We had lots of bolt-on systems to manage digital, our form of digital content that we were acquiring and the digital aspects that we were creating. There were lots of workarounds, and I can't tell you how many, over 100 spreadsheets to try and manage user statistics, record people who are coming in, and just general usage and management of the collections. So that was the challenge. So we wanted to achieve something also that was cloud-based, that had worked with a company that had a clear roadmap and user support, a user community we could tap into that would provide us a single integrated approach, that we could manage our collections regardless of whether they were in digital format or physical, could search across a range of resources, including those we were creating with other partners externally, and generally enable us to streamline our processes. So the virtual library project was born. It formed part of a then library and archive strategy. We had buy-in at executive board level, and they allocated funding for us. We were able to employ a project manager and set up a project board, so our users were represented, our IT colleagues, and we had stakeholders from across the museum and our user base participating in the project, so that the solution we found didn't just suit us as a library and archive, but made sure that we could deliver what we wanted to as a library and archive for that user base. So we had some baseline objectives which helped form our very explicit criteria, success factors, and the benefits that we were then going to have to report that we were realising to the rest of the museum, having invested in that change. We set up a formal procurement process with very clear steps. We had to go out for a formal tender through the European process. So we had very clear criteria that we were going to be, if you like, marking the potential supplier candidates against. And you're not surprised, we selected the Ex Libris, Alma and Primo. And the project timeline actually was quite tight. We did a lot of pre-work, but we packed into effectively a 12-month process, setting up that initial data gathering and intelligence gathering and analysis of how we were currently operating and how we wanted to change. We had formal Prince 2 practice in place to support the process. That programme board was incredibly helpful, as well as the whole user community that we tapped into. We went through a rigorous selection process at various different stages, and colleagues from Ex Libris will remember having to visit our site and go through what Alma and Primo could offer to us to meet our very strict requirements. And we eventually had an implementation plan ready to go at the beginning of January 2014, and had concluded that process by the 14th of July. And the reason that was so successful was because of the project support that Ex Libris set up. We were very fortunate that with Alma in particular, it had already been rolled out to a number of UK institutions, predominantly in the academic sector. So I think, if not the first, we were certainly one of the first of our type of institution that took up Alma. But the rigour of that process that Ex Libris led us through was really important for us, because this was not just about replacing one library system with another. This was about taking the whole of library and archive through a change process, so that we would be operating in a very different way, with different procedures and different practice at the end of the process. And it was down to the project model that Ex Libris led us through that we were able to achieve that. Some things weren't perfect. There was only one data migration, and with hindsight, another migration test would have been good, given the nature of the type of records we had, and the fact that we have to keep our records, particularly acquisition records, for probably much longer than many other institutions have to, because of our obligations under the Museum Act. But I'm going to move on, because I realise I've been talking for quite some time, and there may be some questions coming. But I do want to go into the post-go live stage, which is really the exciting stage. It's where we started to realise the benefit and to realise that investment in making that change to Alma and Primo. So the first thing was that we're supporting a complex operating model. We were still geographically spread across 3 sites. And very shortly after taking on Alma and Primo, we had to vacate a space at the museum for other museum purposes. So it meant that we had to quite rapidly relocate some of our collections to a store we have south of the river, but also to build a partnership with the British Library and store some of our lower use material at Boston Spa, not in the UK Research Reserve, in some of their existing expansion space. So being able to generate very accurate records, we barcoded everything that was going to be moved. So we were able to generate very precise inventories, which meant that we knew what was being transported, we knew that it had arrived safely. British Library, for example, knew what had been taken on, and it means that we can, without integrating our separate library systems, we can do regular checks. It also means that because of the way that Alma and Primo now allow us to operate, we can track usage very, very carefully and closely. So I mentioned that we want to expose a range of our collections through a single search function, search portal, and Primo integrated with Alma allows us to do that. So that range of content we already had and wanted to, new content that we were acquiring or generating, can all now be searched through a single point by the NHM website, which was a first for us and a first for the museum actually in terms of its collections. Oh, I've gone back. And a critical element for us was also understanding our user base. Because of Alma and Primo and the streamlining of all of our processes, it released us time so that we could set up proper librarian liaison with the research groups, the curation groups and the engagement groups in the museum, as well as properly engage with our external visitors and the public so that we could, if you like, scrutinise how they're using our collections and using our services so that we can continue to develop them and improve them and make them even more relevant and fit for purpose. So this is just a little map that we've actually done fairly recently for a big piece of work that is happening right now that I'll come on to right at the end about our future. But it's really just illustrative of how this is just two users, one in life sciences within the museum and one in earth sciences, and how they are using collections both physically and digitally across a number of different subject areas, as well as operating in their own virtual environment within the museum and amongst their collaborators. But through the use of Primo, and they can set up profiles and we can track their usage, it means we've got much richer data to understand both user behaviours, but also where their preferences are, what new subjects are coming up, and that just boosts any one-to-one or one-off surveys or focus group work we have. And it was a key driver for our technology change, and it's an area that we have realised, and it also means that the areas that we're wanting to expand in terms of the humanities, and particularly the history of science use of our collections, means that we've got much richer data to be able to start developing those areas, including the wherewithal through the catalogue to deepen the range of search terms that we apply to our collections so that they're much more discoverable. And it means working in partnership now with those new communities in a way that we just couldn't properly before. Now, with the Black Lives Matter movement coming to the fore more recently, and the additional scrutiny, particularly of collections like ours, which have, in some instances, quite difficult histories, we don't want to brush those under the carpet. We want to work with those communities to describe our collections in ways that they are still used, but described appropriately for the context in which they're used now, not just their historical context. So unlocking the taxonomic intelligence in our collections is another key driver, and this relates to how we want to continue to expand how we collaborate outside the museum and connect our collections to those held by other institutions to create that critical mass of data that's buried in our collections to support open science approaches to tackling some of those big scientific challenges and ultimately tackle and find solutions and understand what is happening during this planetary crisis. And our library management system and the discovery system in particular, Alma and Primo, are supporting and underpinning that, enabling us to reach out to those wider networks and collaborators and communities, and also to understand the stretch of our collections and how they're used. And this image of our global reach just gives an idea of the relevance of our content and our collections globally. So we're realising through this change, through this one change to Alma and Primo, we're realising our strategic plans. And I realise that you've put in plans twice there, that we're aiming for our researchers and our user communities to be able to move seamlessly between use of the physical collections and that full space now, that digital environment. But also expanding to wider communities who may find our content in whatever form and the expertise that is exposed through the descriptions of our collections and our content to be directly relevant to ongoing research and new research. And it's expanded our capability. We have had to already relocate our collections, and we have a system that supports us doing that efficiently and effectively with low risk of problems. And we're about to engage in a massive organisational change in 2026-27 that I'll come on to. It's helping us to move across a multiple site model, both in terms of managing physical collections and the services and digital content we're providing access. It helped us achieve archive service accreditation because although we use a separate management system, CALM, for the Museum Archives of Modern Records, it is possible now to search across all of those resources. It's enabled us to expand our effective participation with those global initiatives such as the Biodiversity Heritage Library and newer collection-related initiatives such as DISCO, which is a distributed programme to unite in a virtual environment the specimen collections that are held across the globe. So it's helping that next phase of digitisation and discovery, and we're hoping that it's underpinning what we'll be able to do through recruiting a research leader, which is a new development for the library and archive, and it's helping us develop for the future. So I realise I've gone over this 25 minutes, I promised, but just to touch on what's been happening during this COVID period. Again, we've had to transform ourselves very rapidly, as many of you will have had to have done over these recent months. On the 18th of March, we had to start thinking about very rapidly deactivating the museum site and the physical presence of library and archive on site. So from the period April to July, the museum was closed. We had a few people going in to do some essential work, so to check the collections and to carry out some essential tasks that could not be carried out from home. And if we didn't do, things would go awry. But because of Alma and Primo, we were able to gear up for working from home. And more importantly, through Alma and Primo, we were able to enable our colleagues, both inside the museum and outside the museum, to be able to work from home and keep functioning. So through July and August, we were also expanding our services, and we began to have a little bit more presence back on site so that we could enable facilitated access through digitising our collections on demand. We were able to support people to continue working remotely. And in September, the museum is open to the public in a very limited way. There's more science presence on site, but on a very limited way. No more than 9 of the library and archives staff are on site at any one time, and that's the maximum, so that we can maintain those social distancing rules, but also carry out some essential work. But the critical thing in all of this is that because we had that direction of travel to continue to provide access to digital versions of our collections, increased our digital provision of Born Digital through open access and subscription, and enabling discovery of our collections through Alma and Primo. It meant that we were able to support people in a way that 5 or 6 years ago we could not have done. So we've also taken advantage of the offer that Ex Libris provided for record ILL during that period. It was taken up, and again that was another way of boosting the offer that we could provide during that critical few months of closure. And this is just a snapshot. This is just our internal usage over an 18-month period. And so you can see the COVID period from March onwards, and you can see a big spike in April and May. There was a bit of a dip for a period because the museum took up the furlough scheme offered by the government. So many of our colleagues were not actually working, or at least not officially working, during that period. So we did see a drop-off of usage, but it is beginning to climb again. And it, compared to the same period during 2019, the usage was and this is just for our internal usage, dramatically different. What we have seen, although it's been peaks and troughs, is that because of the capability that Primo in particular has provided in enabling this cross-resource searching, that people have been able to exploit what the museum has been able to offer during a period of disrupted working from home, or working on site in a limited way. So I'm going to move on to the future. And the big news that we had just before the lockdown, and we heard about this when actually Robert Blay from Ex Libris was making a site visit. So we were talking to him about Alma and Primo and next steps for us in terms of our take-up of that range of resources that Ex Libris provides. But I was called out to be told that the museum had successfully achieved a funding proposal submitted to government for 182 million development at the science site at Harwell in Oxford. So the museum over the coming 5 years will be developing a science and digitisation centre at Harwell. Hence the name of the programme at the moment. No doubt when we've built this new building, it will be named, hopefully after somebody who has been a supporter of the museum. Who knows? But the critical thing for us is that during this next 5 years, we're going to be we are gathering lots and lots of data about our users, our collections, to understand how, as a library and archive, we will need to reorganise across the South Kensington and Tring sites. Do we retain our collections at Boston Spa, and what might go to Harwell, as well as developing our services, exploiting Alma and Primo, so that we can continue to deliver a service across all those sites and meet the requirements of our colleagues and collections, and what new things will be developed through that new facility at Harwell. So that's our future. So I'm going to pause at that point. You've all been very patient listening to all of that, but I do hope it's been interesting. And if you have any questions, I hope you will ask them. And I hope that what I've shown you is that for us, it wasn't just a technology change. It was about a complete change program, and Alma and Primo have been fundamental to enabling that change.
So Jane, first of all, thank you very much. That was a really interesting presentation. I can't believe it's so long ago. It was really a long time ago, and you were indeed one of the first Alma customers in the UK. I didn't remember that actually before your presentation. So we obviously have a lot more now, but it was great to have you at that time as well. There is a question actually from one of the participants who was actually asking whether the digitization program that you embarked upon, and I think that you continue to embark upon, does that deal with digital preservation as well? So in other words, are you making sure, are you using technology to make sure that the files that you save today will be retrievable and usable in 5 or 10 years from now?
That's a really good question, actually, and the answer to that is that long-term digital preservation, and I think the current term that I've learned again from Robert actually is about data safety. So in terms of the standards to which we're working, yes, it's at that preservation level. In terms of the systems that we have to support that, through our external collaboration and what we are contributing to the Biodiversity Heritage Library, I am confident that we have a long-term solution for that particular, if you like, subset of images. For the ones that we may not contribute to BHL and or might develop in the future, internally we do not have a long-term solution yet. We have a dam system, but it's not a long-term solution. And actually, the museum is now looking for the next stage in terms of that preservation. We are interested potentially in what Ex Libris offers specifically for our library and archive content in that context. So over the next few years, we have to find a good solution, and we're hoping that the Harwell programme will form part of that solution as well.
Great, yeah, thank you, Jane, for that comprehensive answer. Also, it's interesting to hear that you might be interested in some of the solutions that we provide. One of the participants is asking whether for that particular aspect you might collaborate with the British Library. Does the Natural History Museum generally collaborate with the British Library? I know that you mentioned some off-site storage, but in other ways as well?
Again, another good question. I mean, my own, and this is my personal view, is that collaboration is the only way to do this for the long term. And I would say certainly open to conversations with the British Library and other institutions. I would hope that we can find a joint solution because the concept, the only tested technology is the paper at the moment. We know that we can protect that. We know we've got examples of that have survived. Sorry, can you hear me all right?
Yes, sure.
Sorry, the paper-based material we know can survive, well, for 250 years. We don't have that certainty yet about the digital, and it's not just about the content, it's making sure that it is accessible in the future. And I honestly do not think that one single institution can solve that problem on their own.
Yeah, it's a great answer, Jane, and I think it's a point that many people are thinking about, of course. And I also, I always feel that our responsibility as professionals is to protect it until the next generation takes over. I guess we can't, I know with books we can protect them for almost forever, but I guess with digital material we just have the responsibility to protect it for the next generation, and then they, take over and worry about it after that. So that's very interesting. It was.
If I may just add though, Alan, I think the other thing to add though is about partnership. So it's not just about institutions; it's also our technology partners as well. So that we're not reinventing, we're tapping into expertise, so that the solutions that we're finding are really robust for however long they can exist for. Indeed,
yeah. So, Jane, it was interesting when you were talking. It used to be the case that when I flew around, which I did all the time before this pandemic, when I was sitting in the plane, it would often come to me what the airport that I was going to land at looked like. And it was funny because when you talked about your staff and the room that we did the demos in, it came to my mind. I can picture very clearly actually the room that we did the demos in. Can you maybe say, Jane, how many of your team eventually worked on the project in a way that it was the major part of their work during the implementation? That would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question actually, because I didn't really touch on that, did I? Well, from the very beginning, it was everybody was in the department was made aware that to a greater or lesser degree, they had no choice but to be involved in this project. They were the ones that understood their work. They had to be invested in whatever future solution we came up with, working with you. So from the very start at the requirement stage, going out and about on visits, talking to colleagues at conferences or on the phone, and feeding all of that in, and actually during the implementation project that you and colleagues led for us, again, there was an expectation that they would actively participate. And I think it was that combination of expected to be involved, the project implementation to go live was a training process as much as an implementation process. It wasn't that you set it up and then we trained afterwards. We were learning as we went. And I think because of that, the solutions we came up with in terms of how we changed our collective practice ended up being a much deeper and more radical change, so that it was really gearing us up for the future. Some things had to stay the same because there are only so many ways of doing it, but the process made, I hope, everybody scrutinise everything, so that what we were left with was really robust for the future. But no, there was no get out. People were not allowed to, they weren't given the choice not to participate. And the same with our users, actually. We actively invited them. We made sure that everybody knew what we were up to, because apart from anything else at the end of it, you always get some people not so happy, but we wanted to make sure that people were really bought into the change that was going to happen.
And I think that's very, very important as well. And I think you took a great approach there. I mean, I don't remember what your previous system was, and it doesn't matter actually, but you know, you didn't want to replicate what you did in your previous system. You really wanted to make a difference. You really wanted to introduce new services, to bring new things to your library and to your users. And I think that method of engaging people was really a great idea. You know, if you want to keep everything as it is now, you don't need to change system. But if you really want to drive change and facilitate change, then I think you took a great approach to do that.
Thank you.
So we have still a few more moments. So if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to use either the chat or Q&A. It's very interesting, Jane, because you have obviously a site in Tring, and you're building the new site in Harwell. I'm in Aylesbury, so I'm kind of in the middle of both of them. So, you know, maybe need to watch out for exactly what you're doing. But I see there is another question. Primo also includes for discovery of external literature databases to enable a single search environment. So I think that's probably talking about either the Primo Central Index or the Central Discovery Index. Do you have access to that as well, Jane, at NHM?
Yes, and again, that's been incredibly helpful to us to, again, widen what we can provide access to or awareness of amongst our users. And it's very much a two-way thing as well. So I don't know if that answered that question. Or... Yeah,
that's great, actually. I think that's exactly the information. So you're, in addition to the wealth of locally held materials that you have within NHM, you also give access to the discovery indexes that we offer as well, which is very common, in fact, for people to do that.
And just to add, I mean, this is a plug for the Biodiversity Heritage Library, but again, for us, this was a really key thing that we wanted to achieve, and you and your colleagues have worked with us on this, which is to include BHL in that broader community content, if you like. So it's not just available for us and our collaborators. Hopefully, it's providing an additional avenue for other institutions who may find that content relevant for their users.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you for that, Jane. So I don't see any more questions at this point, but I'm sure that some might come up, and I'm sure that you would be happy to help. Daniela will actually arrange for the distribution of the recording of this session, which will provide people with your great PowerPoint slides as well. So I'm sure that will be very helpful. So really, Jane, all that remains for me to do is to say once again, thank you very much. It was great to see you again, great to see the museum again, albeit virtually. And to everybody else, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. It's really been my pleasure to host you, and I hope that you found it useful and as interesting as I did. I'm sure that you did. So as I said, we'll circulate the recording. Jane, again, thank you to everybody else. Thank you for joining. Please continue to take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll hopefully see you sometime in the future. Thank you very much.